On the evening of April 17, 1906, San Francisco went to bed. In the hotels along Market Street, lamps were turned down. The opera singer Enrico Caruso retired to his room after a sold-out performance. Along the waterfront, fish market workers were already setting up for morning. In the south of market tenements, families had been asleep for hours. San Francisco was one earthquake away from losing every fire hydrant in the city simultaneously. San Francisco in 1906 was the largest city on the West Coast. 400,000 people on a narrow peninsula bounded on three sides by water. Much of the flat ground near the financial district was not natural land. It was fill, soil, and debris dumped into the bay over decades to extend the city's surface. That fill sat directly above the San Andreas Fault, waterlogged and unstable. Under seismic stress, it would behave like liquid. The buildings above it, tenements in, south of Market, brick hotels along Kearny, rooming houses throughout Chinatown, were unreinforced masonry. Unreinforced brick does not bend, it shatters. Beneath the streets, the entire water distribution network ran through that same unstable ground. A single system, no flexible joints, no isolation valves, no design feature that would allow one section to stay functional if another failed. Dennis Sullivan had known all of this. He had built 23 underground cisterns, sealed reservoirs for when the mains went dry. He had asked for over 100. He had asked for a supplemental saltwater system connected to the bay. Both requests were declined. The chimney of the California Hotel rose directly beside his sleeping quarters. He had raised concerns about that too. The night before was a good one. Caruso had performed to a packed house. Post-theater crowds filled the restaurants on Market Street. In the Barbary Coast bars, the music ran past midnight in the south of Market District. Wooden tenements, recent immigrants, working families, people had been asleep for hours. In Chinatown, 25,000 people slept in 6 square blocks, one of the most densely occupied urban footprints in the country. At the firehouse on Bush Street, Dennis Sullivan was asleep on the upper floor. The California Hotel's chimney rose beside him in the dark. At 5:12 on the morning of Wednesday, April 18, 1906, the ground began to move. The rupture began offshore along the San Andreas Fault and moved south at nearly 2 miles per second. Displacement along the fault, up to 20 feet. The shaking lasted 60 seconds. 2 jolts, with a brief pause between them. The first crack sounded, witnesses said, like a cannon fired directly beneath the street. Then, everything moved at once. South of Market tenements failed in the first 30 seconds. Walls collapsed inward. Floors pancaked. Residents, still asleep, were buried before they reached the stairs. Gas mains ruptured across the city. Underground, water pipes sheared along hundreds of breakpoints simultaneously. At the firehouse on Bush Street, the California Hotel's chimney shifted and came through the roof, through the upper floor. Dennis Sullivan was crushed in his bed, unconscious, and 4 days from death. Firefighters arriving at collapse sites opened their hydrants. No water came. They moved to the next hydrant, dry. Every main that crossed a subsidence boundary, most of them, had already failed. The city was on fire in more than 50 places before the sun had fully risen. Command passed to Acting Chief John Dougherty. He had no water, no prepared citywide plan, and no Dennis Sullivan. Within hours, he also had the Army. General Frederick Funston mobilized federal troops from the Presidio and marched them into San Francisco without waiting for authorization from the mayor, the governor, or the President of the United States. He said later, there had been no time. The Army arrived with dynamite. The plan? Demolish buildings ahead of the fire line and deny it fuel. Standard technique. Requires precision. The soldiers placing charges had no demolitions training. In neighborhood after neighborhood, the blasting did not stop the fires. It spread them. Ruptured gas lines ignited. Burning debris landed beyond the intended fire breaks. That same morning, Mayor Eugene Schmitz, already under federal indictment for extortion when the earthquake struck, issued a proclamation authorizing the killing of any person found engaged in looting or in the commission of any other crime. any other crime. The soldiers enforcing that order were 19 years old. Standing in a burning city they did not know, in smoke so thick the sun did not appear until afternoon. The definition of looting was whatever the soldier in front of you decided it was. 3 fires came from 3 directions at once. South of Market, dozens of blazes from ruptured gas lines merged into a single front. The buildings, wooden, already partially collapsed, were feeding it faster than any crew could move. From Hayes Valley, a woman lit her kitchen stove to cook breakfast. Her chimney was cracked. The fire moved through the walls, then next door, then the next house. Firefighters arrived and found empty hydrants. They watched. For years it was known, in private reports, as the ham and eggs fire. The Army kept blasting. Gas lines that had survived the earthquake were ruptured by the charges. The fires followed the gas. The 23 cisterns Sullivan had ordered ran dry fighting the first blaze. After that, San Francisco's fire department had no water at all. By the end of the second day, the entire financial district was gone. By the morning of the third, the fire was consuming the western addition. It burned 28,000 buildings across 490 city blocks over 74 hours. Then it stopped, not because it was defeated, but because it had run out of city. Police Sergeant Jesse Cook was standing at the corner of Washington and Davis Streets when the shaking began. The whole street was undulating. It was as if the waves of the ocean were coming at me, but instead of water, it was the earth itself. The cobblestones around him were moving in visible waves. A 4-story building across the street collapsed before he could fully process what was happening. Cook survived 72 hours of policing streets he could no longer navigate. Under military authority, he could not refuse. In smoke so thick, every landmark was gone. When asked years later what he most remembered, he said, "The smell. You could smell it for miles before you could see it." By the second day, the smell was everywhere. Relief arrived quickly. 38 Army companies deployed. Naval vessels ferried the injured across to Oakland. The Red Cross established stations in the parks where tens of thousands had assembled. Trains brought supplies from Los Angeles and Portland. The relief effort was real. It was reaching a city whose emergency command structure had been replaced, without legal authority, by the same army that was also spreading the fires it claimed to be stopping. The shoot-on-sight order continued to be enforced. Documented cases exist of civilians shot retrieving belongings from their own collapsed homes. At least one man was killed pulling a neighbor from beneath fallen debris. His movements read as looting in the smoke. The exact number of civilians killed under Schmitz's proclamation has never been counted. It does not appear in any official document. The official death toll of the 1906 San Francisco earthquake and fires was 478. This number was assembled and released within days, while fires were still burning and bodies were still being recovered. It was printed in newspapers across the country. It was the figure on which insurance assessments, federal aid, and historical records were based for the next 6 decades. City archivist Gladys Hansen began compiling the real toll in the 1960s, cross-referencing hospital records, undertaker ledgers, cemetery intake books, and survivor testimony. She documented more than 3,000 individual deaths. She believed the true figure was higher. Her work, Denial of Disaster, was published in 1989, 83 years after the earthquake. The water system had been built without flexible joints, without isolation valves, without any feature that would have kept sections of the network functional after a rupture elsewhere. Sullivan had documented this risk in writing. The city had the reports. The city had not acted. The Army's demolitions campaign was subsequently reviewed by military and civilian engineers. Their findings confirmed that in at least 5 documented locations, the blasting had ignited new fires rather than stopped existing ones. No one was disciplined. The shoot-on-sight proclamation had no basis in California law. Martial law had never been formally declared. Funston's deployment of federal troops had no presidential or gubernatorial authorization. No investigation examined the civilian deaths that followed. Despite all of it, the collapsed infrastructure, the unlawful military deployment, the deaths, the city of San Francisco had not violated a single applicable building code, fire safety standard, or infrastructure regulation in force on April 18, 1906. Technically, legally, administratively, nothing had gone wrong. Mayor Schmitz was convicted in July 1907, not for the deaths, not for the proclamation, not for the suppressed death toll, for extortion, bribes from restaurant owners, charges filed before the earthquake. He was sentenced to 5 years. His conviction was overturned on appeal in 1908. He served no time. He was eventually re-elected to the Board of Supervisors. Political boss Abe Roof, who had controlled Schmitz and the city's contracting for years, pleaded guilty to a single bribery count. Sentenced to 14 years. Paroled after 4.5. General Funston, the man who deployed unauthorized troops, issued weapons to teenage soldiers with orders to shoot, and oversaw a demolitions campaign that spread the fires, was never charged with any offense. He was praised for his swift response. He was promoted to Major General. He was buried at the Presidio with full military honors. No official was ever charged in connection with the deaths of April 1906. The number 478 was chosen within days of the disaster, chosen by people who understood what they were doing. It told investors San Francisco was intact. It told banks their collateral was recoverable. It told the insurance industry the liability was manageable. It told the country that this was a city that had survived, not a city whose government had spent years ignoring the warnings of the man it had left to die under a falling chimney. The question of who fixed that number has never been formally answered. No document records the decision. No official has been identified. No investigation has ever been opened. Gladys Hansen died in 2018. The list she left behind, more than 3,000 names, remains, in her own assessment, incomplete. The number of people who died in San Francisco in April 1906 is, in any precise sense, still unknown. In 2006, on the centennial of the earthquake, San Francisco officially revised its death toll. The number 478, which had stood for nearly a century, was replaced by an acknowledgement that the real figure was likely above 3,000. At Lotta's Fountain on Market Street, the names Gladys Hansen had recovered were read aloud. The city noted it and moved on. The San Andreas Fault still runs the full length of the California coast. San Francisco has expanded its cistern network, retrofitted its water infrastructure, and rewritten its building codes multiple times since 1906. It is better prepared than it was at 5:11 a.m. on April 18th. It had a fire chief who understood exactly what would be needed. He had spent years drawing up the plans and filing the reports. He was asleep when the chimney fell on him. He never gave a single order. Thousands of people died. For 80 years, the city said 478. 78. No one has ever been held accountable for that decision. No one ever will be.